National media would have you believe that the Cincinnati Bengals have a top-heavy roster, but when you dig into it, there are some underrated guys that make this roster more talented than they might lead you to think.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. He's Joe Goodberry. I'm Jake Liscow. Today, we're talking underrated. We're talking deep sleepers. We'll finish the episode with deep sleepers. We're going to start with who the most underrated players are on the 2026 Cincinnati Bengals roster. And I think this applies both within the fan base and when you look at the national media, because there are a lot of guys on this team that are, I think, a little bit unfairly harped upon by the fan base. That's going to be part of the conversation. But part of it is just simply that the national media doesn't necessarily recognize some of the underheralded players in the NFL. And that's not unique to the Bengals, but certainly applies to the Bengals. And there are a number of guys that you could talk about, Joe, when you look at either the NFL 100 or the various top 15 lists that get put out by ESPN and The Athletic when they survey executives, or even just the conversation from pundits that are on the quote-unquote shouty shows. Shout out Sam Monson and Steve Palazzolo for dubbing the shouty shows, the Stephen A. Smith shows of the world, as it were, the Nick Wrights of the world, who are just saying words into microphones about Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. When you dig into this roster, Joe, there are some players that I think don't get enough attention, and that's where we're going to start today's show.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a Mythbuster episode if you listen to those previous where we, defeat some of the narratives that are out there on the national level. But I was listening to a shouty show recently. Well, the algorithm made me listen to it. And it was at least a moment where they said this top heavy roster, and they went, yeah. And I just started yawning at that point because you never see them mention the guys we're going to talk about today. And we could talk about like a breakout of like a Dylan Fairchild or Marius Mims and all that. But I think those are expected. I think even those guys get talked about by a Brandon Thorne, who's like leading offensive line evaluations. This is more about,
can I shout out Nate Tice as well for talking about Marius Mims recently? He's one of the better young tackles in the NFL. He's in that group with the Joe Waltz of the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and guys like we talked DJ Turner on the last episode, he will get brought up on national shows once in a while. It's rare, but it will happen. And I go, yeah, he's deserving of being talked about. Last year when Pro Bowl voting happened, they're like, Turner, that's a sleeper there. He got snubbed. And I'm like, I'm glad to see that. But it goes deeper than that. I think we can go another layer below that, even with our own fans at times, and say, hey, this guy, he's a little bit better. I nominate right off the bat. I'd love to talk Ted Karras and Dax Hill as one offensive, defensive guy that I think even within our own fan base is underrated. But on the national level, they're never going to bring them up.
Yeah, I think plenty of people do appreciate Ted Karras, to be clear, but I don't know if there's necessarily an entire appreciation for what he does. I think that it should be pretty obvious because of how Joe Burrow goes to bat for Ted Karras and how Joe Burrow talks about Ted Karras, and the fact that they've extended Ted a few times into his 30s and he's maintained that level of play, like rock solid center play, knows what defenses are doing, maximizes his physical tools, which have never been near the top of the NFL. Like he's always been a guy that's maximizing what he has, and as a result, you're getting rock solid center play from a guy that honestly, like go back 10 years ago, if you would have said Ted Karras is still going to be in the league, I don't think that most people would buy it, or most people would even know who Ted was. But at this point, he's certainly a captain, a face of the team kind of player, has a huge presence in the city of Cincinnati. Obviously, the Cincy hat is a huge success for him and his charitable foundations and his charitable work, and just in terms of the culture around the city and around the team. But in addition to that, I think as a player, this is a guy that doesn't have glaring weaknesses. That there are certainly ways you can attack him and ways you can go after him with those physical limitations that he has compared to the very top of the center pecking order in the NFL. But a player that I can't think of better words to describe it than rock solid, so I'm just going to say it a third time. Very steady presence in the middle of that offensive line that really keeps that thing running at a high level.
Yeah, and to give it some numbers to put it in perspective, last year we know the Bengals pass the ball a lot, right, guys? Like everyone that's listening here, they throw the ball, and they're in the most true pass set situations in the entire league because of how much they throw the ball. Last year, Ted Karras ranked second in PFF grade in true pass sets. This is coming off a year 2024 where the Bengals had Burrow all year and they're throwing the ball. He was third among centers in true pass set grade, allowing 1 sack and having the best pass block efficiency in the league. If you go back to like 2020, his pass block efficiency for interior offensive linemen is in the top 5 to 7 almost every single year. He is incredibly consistent at what the Bengals do and ask of him. So to me, when we started this show layout, we're like, let's talk about some sleepers, some underrated guys. One of the first guys we mentioned was Ted Karras, because I think because of local Cincinnati know him as the captain, the leader, the Cincy hat, the rah-rah, against Tennessee after that game, like all that. People see that and say, well, he's not that good to have all this attention. And I come back the other way. The pendulum swings the other way and go, actually, in pass protection, he's rock solid at everything. But in pass protection, he has been really freaking good.
And the Bengals signed him coming off of a year for New England where he's playing left guard. And for the last 4 years, he's played over 1,000 snaps every single year.
Great signing at this point, right?
I mean, more than great. I think it was kind of scoffed at the time, like, oh, they're signing like a replacement level center. He maybe can back up a few interior positions kind of thing. And he's gone on to be one of the best pass blocking centers in the NFL for the most part in the pass heaviest offense in the NFL for the last 4 years. So a great scheme fit for what the Bengals like to do on offense. I mentioned the relationship with Joe Burrow. I think that probably can't be overrated. And I think the leadership that he's provided for the rest of the offensive line, which goes along with Orlando Brown, who might also be a little bit underrated in some ways himself, just because I don't think he's as bad as people think he is. I think he's pretty standard average left tackle in the NFL for the most part. The leadership qualities as well, I think, very important to the development of this offensive line and the cohesion of this offense. Talk about continuity. Ted Karras, a big part of that for this team.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's funny because as I was listening to a national show, and even I read a review or our preview for the season, and it was talking about the Bengals offensive line, and it said Orlando Brown was still a solid left tackle. It said Amarius Smith was a breakout candidate. They loved what Dylan Fairchild did last year, and then that was it, and they moved on. And I was like, yeah, but number one, I love Dalton Reisner at right guard. That is worth a mention. It's hard for me to hear and not hear people mention how good he was for the Bengals last year. And then to skip over Karras at that point, I'm just like, when I hear it, I'm kind of like, he's worth a mention. He's underrated if you're not even bringing him up.
Well, and so too is Dalton Reisner at that point, who the NFL entirely, including the Bengals, looking at the contract Dalton Reisner took, like nobody seems to value Dalton Reisner all that highly, but it seems like when you watch him, he consistently outperforms what he's getting paid. And last year we saw him, as we've discussed several times, have this run blocking breakout under Scott Peters that we did not think that we were going to get from Dalton Reisner, but
we did not at all.
You mentioned
actually a little bit, right? We warned that Reisner may not be a great run blocker, and it turned out he was actually really good. We also warned that, hey, he may rub people the wrong way or not be a great fit because we couldn't explain why the league didn't like Dalton Reisner as much as we did on evaluation. And then all you hear are like glowing reviews of him in the locker room. You watch the film, he's running downfield, picking guys up. So this turned out to end up being a Ted Karras underrated, but you know who else is? Dalton Reisner's underrated. Very good pass protector as well.
Yeah, and like we said, that breakout as a run blocker, the culture thing is so weird because like it wasn't just speculation, although it was largely speculation. There was like people talking about, he's a little bit of maybe a weird guy, but hasn't seemed to be the case. The only thing you could argue is maybe that he's got a wife who's active on social media, but she's popular as well, and it's incredibly harmless. If anything, it's entertaining, like watching them run the flying pig, the 5K or whatever they did, and watching her content honestly, I find better than harmless. I think it's good, even when especially it involves Dalton. So I have no complaints with that. Not that I watch it often, but if you're harping on them for that, I think that's crazy. So there's a couple. We talked about Dax Hill at the top of the show as well. There are a couple players on the defensive side of the ball. There are a couple players in the Bengals backfield on offense that we want to talk about as well as we continue the conversation around underrated Bengals coming up next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by BetterHelp, and we talk about mental health more openly now as a society, but asking for help can still feel hard, and BetterHelp has research to confirm it. They surveyed 2,000 Americans, and 85% believe getting support is wise, but 74% say society discourages people from doing so, and that disconnect is interesting. Most people believe support is a good thing, but actually taking the step can be difficult. So it's worth asking what helps make that conversation feel more normal and more encouraged. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with over 30,000 therapists globally. They've helped more than 6 million people connect with support. And through a short questionnaire, BetterHelp does the initial match for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. And if the match isn't right, users can switch to a different therapist from tailored recommendations. So the point here today is to try to normalize the conversation. Most people would encourage someone else to talk to a therapist, but it's harder when it's you yourself. Sometimes hearing someone else normalize getting support is enough to make that first step feel more approachable. So don't let stigma get in the way of the support that is available to you. Get started with therapy with BetterHelp. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Jake, if I were to ask you, who is the most underrated defender on the Bengals roster right now? I wonder what the listener in the comments would say as well. The first two guys pop in my mind. One is BJ Hill, who we didn't outline here today before we started the show. But the next one for me, and it probably who's what I would settle on my answer being, is Dax Hill at corner. And I just had this guy. I just did a film review of all Dax's targets last year to get a refresh what it looked like when he went back to the boundary. And one of the comments I had on that show was, this is a make or break year for Dax Hill. He's been a bust so far. And this is a Bengals fan. I was shocked to read that. I know some people didn't like the Dax pick, and I think that tends to linger longer than it should. I think it does for NFL teams and GMs as well, if you like a guy or don't, and how long that can affect you as the guy approaches free agency and wants to be paid. But Dax, when he was moved to boundary corner in 2024, it was just a short span. It was a month. I think it was the 5th game. He got hurt, but he was the 22nd highest graded corner for PFF in 2024 from just playing on the boundary. They tried to move him in the slot last year. Things were wonky and weird for the first half of the year for everyone. Nobody really played well other than DJ Turner, right? And then the fleeting moments of Trey Hendrickson that we did have. After that, when Dax got moved back to the boundary, so we're talking about the final 6 weeks of the season, starting with that Patriots game, Dax Hill was PFF's 3rd highest graded cornerback over those final 6 weeks. He was the highest graded in coverage and tackling. We talked about in the previous episode, DJ Turner and his issues with run defense and tackling. That is not an issue with Dax Hill. So to me, when you see that, and this is 2 years now of being on the boundary, 10 games maybe total, I get it. We'll see it for a full year this year. But in the sample size we have, and from what we saw from evaluation and a data perspective, and seems like a good dude in the locker room and on the field, right? I don't see how we can call Dax Hill a bust. He's never brought up nationally. And I think at least in our own bubble here, we should talk about Dax Hill like they have 2 good corners.
Yeah, if you're looking for like a breakout candidate among these players that are underrated, which was originally part of our idea for the show that didn't end up quite fitting exactly the way we wanted it to, Dax Hill would probably be that guy because the last 6 games of the season potentially are underrated by the masses or not noticed because of where the Bengals were in their last 6 games last year. Yeah, Joe Burrow was back, and there was a moment where if they won out, there were playoff scenarios that were in play, but it was mostly like an afterthought unless the Bengals had won 5 games in a row going into week 18. Then maybe you start hearing a little bit more chatter about him, or 4 games in a row going into week 17. You get the idea. But the versatility from Dax Hill by his experience, I think doesn't necessarily need to show up in a way of positional versatility. Like, we don't need him to go play the overhang or whatever, but he is more comfortable in the box. He is more comfortable in the run game. He is more comfortable as a blitzer than DJ Turner, who's more of your traditional pure cover corner. And while DJ was drawing the tougher assignments and probably was still a better player than Dax down the stretch, because when DJ Turner is taking the number one and as a result you get the number two, your assignment is easy if you're Dax Hill. I think it's easy to let his early years color your perception of what he is now, which is a very good outside corner, at least in my opinion, in your opinion, as well as you just discussed. Like, the Bengals couldn't figure out a position for him. When he came into the league, this was one of our biggest disagreements ever. I thought Dax Hill should get a chance at outside corner first. And if he fails there, then you can try him elsewhere. The Bengals went a different approach, and eventually he landed at outside corner where, as I kind of thought when I was looking at him on tape, his movement ability plays up and his change of direction ability plays up, and his ability to be sticky in coverage is a result of those athletic traits, in my opinion. And the game obviously has slowed down for him as he's gotten more experience and all those things. The other big thing with Dax that I wanted to mention is coming off that ACL injury, a lot of times it's year two where you see these guys really start to feel more themselves and really start to recover from that injury in full, especially at the cornerback position where often it can take a year. And maybe that was just what we saw from Dax late in the year last year, but maybe there's something else there too coming with Dax in year two removed from that ACL injury, now that he hopefully has a fully healthy season ahead of him.
Last point on Dax. Last 6 weeks, he was targeted 21 times in coverage. He allowed just 11 catches in those final 6 weeks, 97 yards, and 5 pass breakups. That's just under 2 catches and 16 yards per game. We're talking about DJ Turner allowing 25 per game. Yeah, he's taking on the number one guy, but these numbers that he had at the end of the season, elite. He had the 11th best man coverage grade, and he had the 7th best zone coverage grade. And look, like, if that's what you're getting, and this is where the national media is like really underrating the potential of the Bengals defense. If you have 2 top 15 corners, as we established that DJ Turner is at least a top 15 corner, that could be real good.
Yeah, maybe Dax gets to the top 20 conversation this year.
Yeah.
Maybe DJ's in the top 10 conversation and Dax is pushing on the top 15 conversation this year. The cynical part of me, and I was trying to suppress this thought, but now I've said it out loud and I can't, is that the Bengals corners weren't giving up a lot of yards because the Bengals linebackers were just getting targeted the entire game. And the Bengals safeties were getting targeted the entire game, especially Geno Stone. And I think there's probably at least a kernel, if not a whole popcorn.
I did data dive on that. It is true. They were targeted at a higher rate inside. The Bengals had middle of the field open at a higher rate than probably they should have. Let's funnel those targets to our better players.
So there's Dax Hill. Another DB that we're not going to have as much time to talk about in depth here. Jordan Battle, volatile player, right? But not a bad player because of that playmaking upside that he's shown. If he can be more consistent, then you've got a pretty darn good player on your hands. And wanted to get to the Bengals backfield here a little bit. And this is largely spurred by a few things that we've heard lately. Kyren Williams being in the NFL 100. We'll see if Chase Brown's on the list or not. I would be a little bit surprised at this point if he shows up, but Kyren Williams and Chase Brown are not that different of players, and it's almost easy to make an argument that Chase Brown is better. And you were listening to another show you mentioned, Joe, where Samaje Perine wasn't mentioned as a top pass blocking back in the NFL.
Crazy.
And I mean, I think he's awesome at that. I think he's an excellent second down back, second running back. And so those are a couple of guys that also bear conversation when you're talking about underrated players.
Yeah, if we extended it to like predict breakout players too from this underrated group, Jordan Battle could do it. If you took just his high upside flashes over his 3 years in the NFL, you could make a case that that's a good player. Now, yes, the missed tackles, sometimes the effort, his athleticism can limit him, but he does make plays. He does hammer guys when they're, when he hits them. When he wants to, I should say, because there's a lot of times we got a lot of low light plays. We know. I don't want to give you the Bears game flashing through your mind again, but there are plays where you can see that. You can see what he can be. I think that's part of the frustration with him and probably why he's not talked about more, because he's not a complete player. But there have been a lot of moments where this defense has needed a play, and I'm like, who got it? It's Jordan Battle again. And he's been close to a lot of other interceptions. If I were to pick a breakout player, Dax, yes. Karras isn't going to break out, right? Reisner's not going to break out from this group. Chase Brown has already broken out. Perine's not going to break out. I would say the next one here is Jordan Battle, and there's potential for that.
Joe, I know you got one more point on Samaje Perine that you wanted to get to as well. Jordan Battle as a breakout potential does make sense. And like I said, and I think you were kind of echoing, it's a matter of consistency there. And can he do it on a regular basis? But we'll wrap up the conversation on the underrated guys and talk about some of the deep sleepers that could wake up and play significant roles for this team or important roles for this team to finish the show next.
Jake, I know you'll love this one because you're a big Samaje Perine supporter. Because I'm listening to, I think it was the Athletic Football Show, and they were going kind of in depth on who's the best pass protectors, and they're doing all these kind of niche, who are the best, right? Who's the best slot guy? Who's the best tackler? Whatever. They were doing on this episode that I was listening was the best pass protecting running backs. It was a question that was submitted to them, and they brought up a bunch of good players, a bunch of good pass protectors. They did not mention Samaje Perine. You love Samaje Perine. I've always think he's a good dude, right? I like him personally. I like the plays he's made for them. I like that he has power. I like that he's a contrasting running back to Chase Brown in a lot of ways. But he is, and I will not deny, one of the best pass protecting running backs in the entire league. And if we bring up Karras and Reisner for like great fits as pass protectors in a pass heavy offense, you need pass protectors. And we shouldn't forget Chase Brown in this conversation too. Like he has made a lot of progress there. I hope Tahj Brooks, who we'll talk about in a second as a sleeper, follows Perine in the same path and like tries to do and pick up the same things that Chase Brown has. But Perine, last point, is legitimately good pass protecting running back.
Underrated in general, underrated by the general public, underrated by you, Joe Goodberry. I mean, I just really like what Samaje Perine does. I think that he is a fully capable running back, not necessarily the most explosive player, but we talked about it about 3 weeks ago. We compared the explosive numbers for Samaje Perine and Chase Brown last year. And obviously Chase Brown is a more explosive athlete, but Samaje Perine is, at least last year, putting together some of the longest runs that are just as long as Chase Brown's longest runs. And we've seen him turn screens into touchdowns in big moments for this team. Yeah, efficient is a great word for it. Were they talking, I'm just curious here, then we'll switch to our sleeper conversation. Were they talking about primarily like running back ones, or were they talking about these niche running backs who are coming in for third down passing situations?
No, they did niche guys too, because I'm trying to remember the name of the Syracuse running back that went to the Bucks, who's like the third running back, and they brought him up. I'm like, if you're going that deep, what are we doing? Yeah, LaQuint Allen, right?
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and this guy was like undrafted, and he is good. And that was one of the things coming out of Syracuse. But like, Perine deserves a mention.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. That feels like one of those things where like a coach mentioned it to them, like, yeah, man, LaQuint Allen's one of the best pass protecting backs in the league. And then it's stuck in the mind of who's talking on the Athletic Football Show. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk about some of our deep sleepers. We're talking about, you know, like Joe hinted at, the Tahj Brooks of the world, the Keyshawn Williams in the return game at running back, Eric Gentry, the linebacker undrafted free agent is Javon Foster or Andrew Coker. These tackle depth pieces are these guys deep sleepers. Bralyn Lux, I know he's one of your guys. Maybe that's where a lot of the conversation is. As far as rookies, I think the Bengals have a lot of rookies on day 3 that could be construed as sleepers that could carve out a significant rotational role for this team, including Landon Robinson, including Jack Hendries, including Brian Parker and Connor Liu. So a lot of guys that you could talk about here as potential sleepers that could emerge into role players for this team.
I didn't know if you're going to mention Landon Robinson, just because, you know, the 7th rounder, he's got to make the roster first. There's a lot of D-tackle depth. And if you didn't mention him, he would be mentioned within the first 3 comments on YouTube, I'm sure. Yeah. So I'm glad you did, and we don't have to.
We had him mentioned in a sleeper comment unprompted, I think last week. Yeah.
No, every time. And I can't wait to see him. I honestly, if you were a list like, who do you want to see in preseason? Probably when we get there, right? Well, that'll probably be a conversation. Like, what are you excited for? Because I love preseason. A lot of these guys qualify for this. But Landon Robinson's going to be one. Tahj Brooks, though. Tahj Brooks, the Bengals haven't brought in a backup running back. I'm talking third, fourth guys, and, you know, real competition to that spot. I think teams generally get to that third running back more often than they'd like to. Injuries happen at that position. So the Bengals putting a lot of trust in Tahj. And Tahj talked about slimming up a little bit, getting in better shape, running routes with Chase Brown and going to see his guy, which I think could be really big for him. So if he's also learning the pass protection side from Samaje Perine, maybe some of the quicker, more route running side from Chase Brown, who does a lot of work in the receiving game, one of the best receiving backs in the league, which is why he's underrated, because I think we just look at rushing stats too often and not total yardage. But Tahj Brooks last year, he didn't have a great year. We understand he looked slow. He looked like he had a trailer attached to him, right? 16 carries, 48 yards, 2.8 per. Not what we saw in college. In college, very low center of gravity, great balance, a very squatty type runner that could break tackles, bounce off guys, remain on his feet, churn out extra hard yardage. We really didn't get to see that as a rookie. But if the game has slowed down, if he has gotten quicker and he gets to have flashes in the preseason, I would feel much better about him as RB3. And why we even talk about him as a deep sleeper is because if Perine or Chase Brown do go down for any time, he is the only guy that I'd even be interested in taking carries or having an opportunity on this Bengals roster. And we see this around the league all the time, that it was a guy you probably liked in college. You liked him on film. You liked him in the draft. And now he's thrust with a role and an opportunity, and he would get consistent carries to maybe speed up his game a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Tahj Brooks looked like a capable player. And this may apply to fantasy relevant, deep teams or league owners or managers that are looking for that guy that could do something. It could be Tahj Brooks.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how his game comes together in the preseason, because it felt like to me the NFL power wasn't there. The NFL strength wasn't there. And it didn't look like that was going to be the case. Like you said, when you watch how he played in college, you would think that he could be a Samaje Perine light in the NFL. Samaje Perine was obviously awesome in college, was like the lead back over Joe Mixon when they were teammates at Oklahoma. So Perine was a very productive player in his own right in college, and a little bit of a different profile than Tahj Brooks coming into the league. But it wasn't that for Tahj Brooks. And so he will need to take a pretty significant step, both in terms of understanding how he needs to be approaching the line of scrimmage. You talk about the speed of the game and his pre-line of scrimmage work and just finishing runs. And that's why I'm curious to see where his focus this offseason translates, because he's talked about taking the Chase Brown approach of emphasizing the passing game part of things. And if that includes pass blocking, that's great. I think he's been working a lot on route running from the sounds of it as well, because that was really a big deal for Chase Brown, is developing as a receiver and an all-round threat. But Chase Brown obviously has a level of athleticism that isn't there for Tahj Brooks. And so seeing how that develops, I think will be an interesting preseason one to watch. I agree with you there, Joe. And the other one that I think I want to make sure we give you time to talk about, Bralyn Lux, one of your guys in that slot corner competition. I think certainly a deep sleeper in that competition with Jalen Davis, who is potentially classifiable as a sleeper as well, and Jasir Taylor for that slot corner starting job.
Yeah, if I were to say Jasir Taylor, Bralyn Lux, Jalen Davis, who's the best man cover guy, I would say that it's Bralyn Lux. I think he's got the better movement skills, better hips, more fluidity. I think he attacks the ball the best out of all of them, better ball skills, which for me, fluidity, man coverage, ball skills, right? That's a great combination. And then you look at him as a blitzer last year when they gave him the opportunity to do it in preseason. I thought he looked really good. They gave him that number 21. Kind of looks like a Mike Hilton a little bit. They all do on the slide. I'm going to use that a lot. Like, this is another Mike Hilton. They are until we replace him. But they let Lux blitz a lot and run blitz. There's a play against the Cardinals, I want to say, when he got to play week 17 last year. So it was second to last game. He was covering Trey McBride. He looked really good there. And then he's coming off the blitz on one play in the goal line and the run in that way. And he just goes 100 miles an hour, full steam ahead, right into the hip of like the left tackle or tight end, whoever was blocking the left side there. He missed the running back completely, right? Don't get me wrong. Running back scored. But Bralyn Lux went head first into the line and just absolutely crashed that side. And he delayed there for a second. I'm like, that is what I'm looking for in the slot corner. You missed, but way to go. We need more of that.
Well, sometimes that's your job too. Sometimes your job is to blow it up and let somebody else come make the tackle. And it just is reminiscent when you describe it that way of Mike Hilton once again, in terms of Mike Hilton taking on tackles, taking on pulling guards, taking on pulling tight ends. And doing a pretty darn good job of it, especially for a guy that was his size. Another one of your guys here, Joe, that I want to let you talk about for a minute or two before we get out of here.
Okay.
As another deep sleeper, Antwan Powell-Ryland. Unless there's someone else you'd really like to talk about more than Antwan Powell-Ryland, but you brought his name up. You're putting this list together, and I was like, yeah, we'll see. But talk him up. Talk about why he has a shot.
So Antwan Powell-Ryland was a guy, Virginia Tech last year, right? Last year's draft, not this current draft, that we had a high score on in our draft process. And we understand how stupid that is when he goes late in the draft and then is cut, right? And then gets claimed. The Bengals never use him. And you kind of just never hear it. This happens once in a while. But why was he so high? Well, because he was a very good athlete with a high-end pass rush production profile. It's a guy that won at a high rate. We're talking 90th percentile and everything pass rush related and above. And that's what you're looking for when you're watching my tape. Very short, squatty build, a lot of Carl Lawson in him, good power. Isn't the fastest, quickest get off. He wins with his hands. He wins with an array of moves and a lot of alignments. And when you have that, and he's a guy that is listed at 250, depending on when you look at it, but as an outside linebacker, edge, stand-up type guy, I was very curious because Bengals are listing him at linebacker on the website. So what does that mean? But then you go and watch the OTAs and see what group of players he's with, and he's not with the linebackers. He's with the edge rushers and getting a lot of similar treatment to Cassius Howell, where they're in the 2-point stance, and I assume they're doing that with Boye Mafe and the other guys as well in the edge room because the Bengals are going to do a lot of that in their defense. I just want to see if Powell-Ryland looks like he still did in college. And if he does, and in preseason, man, that could be a competition for that final spot that I think he could be a good fit for what they want to do.
You can draw a lot of parallels between Antwan Powell-Ryland and Cassius Howell in the pre-draft process in terms of how they tested athletically, where Powell-Ryland actually tested like a slightly better athlete in terms of all the Pro Football Focus analytic data that we use to track how productive these guys were in college. It has generally translated pretty well to the NFL. Both players 23 coming out, both players about 6'2", both players about 250, 255, 258, whatever their weights are. So some similarities in their build. Obviously, we have the higher overall film scores on Cassius Howell between you and Mike Santagata, who are the primary contributors to our edge rusher film grading. But in a lot of ways, when you look at how these guys are built, there's some pretty significant similarities between Powell-Ryland and Cassius Howell. They also both have names that end in owl. So got that going for you too there between those two. So will he have a real shot? I think is a big question. Will he be the guy that in camp is just kind of doing what Cassius Howell is doing, but in the second, third string role? I guess third string role is probably the more likely outcome there, but you are seeing them kind of lean into this Viper thing a little bit. And both he and Cassius Howell, Antwan Powell-Ryland and Cassius Howell will be the two guys that fit that role in Al Golden's defense, that hybrid linebacker edge role the best, both in terms of body type and experience, I think, for that being something that Al Golden might want to do more of in 2026.
Yeah, my fingers are just crossed that he gets an opportunity. And maybe it's just preseason. Maybe it's a Matt Lee situation where he looks good when he plays and we never hear the guy. It's okay to root for these bottom of the roster guys that you like a little bit because they made one play at some point and it's stuck in your brain. That's half the fun.
Just looking for sleepers to wake up. It was Dante Myers when we talked to Dan Horde last week. Right. And in the past, it's been guys like DJ Ivey who have carved out significant roles as role players on defense, but primarily special teamers. And that will be a big part of this for the Bengals. And we'll be watching for that in training camp as well. We've got a fun guest coming for you in a couple days here on the Locked On Bengals podcast to wrap up this week. Until then, we appreciate all the everydayers out there. This has been another fun episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.